or of as well as of climate action more in general. That's what we want to explore. We want to explore gaps. We want to explore opportunities, and really with the aim of moving from discussion to action. We'll get to the detail of how we think we want to move to action as we go into the discussion, but really we encourage you to think of this next couple of hours as something that we want to not have a discussion for the sake of it, but really, what does this mean for capacity building ideas, for research agendas, for thinking around knowledge generation, knowledge production, in the context of adaptation and climate action, particularly around the NAPs, or National Adaptation Plans, and the NDCs, Nationally Determined Contributions. So you've all have seen the agenda. You all have received the agenda. We didn't put it up here, but basically I want to give you like a couple of bullet points of what's going to be happening, just to refresh it in your mind, and please feel free to go and have a look at this document which you have received. But basically we'll have some opening remarks just briefly, and I'll introduce the speakers, of course. Then we'll have a panel discussion for about 45 minutes or 40 minutes, and that's also packed with exciting opinions and panelists. We'll have a Q&A session where you'll be able to just pose questions and commentaries to the speakers. We'll have a breakout room discussion afterwards for 45 minutes where you'll be able to really kind of talk more directly. So that'll be the more interactive part. You'll be able to engage, share your experiences, your challenges, your concerns, and so on. There'll be a reporting back session where a member of your group will be able to come back and summarize what the discussion was. And we'll have finally the closing remarks. So that's where we're headed at the moment. A word on the netiquette. We would like, there's 5 quick points I want to mention. Please, if you haven't already done so, for everyone's reference or for easy reference, go to your box in the 3 dots. You can rename yourself, and just ideally you put your name, your last name, and then the organization you're with, like maybe you can see in mine here. Cameras off, please, just for the sake of bandwidth. So have it off unless obviously you're one of the speakers. And then in the breakout group sessions, we'll ask you to turn it on because it's a smaller group. But for now, off. Microphones muted, please, so that we don't have any interference. But if you want to say something, you can always make a comment in the chat, particularly, of course, when we are going into the panel for the Q&A. As I mentioned, language, there's English and French simultaneous translation, and we've gone through that. Hopefully, you are already in the right channel. Otherwise, just send the comment and we'll take care of that. And finally, this event is being recorded, but it's for internal purposes use only, and it will not be shared publicly, but we will use it for the PCCB network purposes and sharing among ourselves. Okay, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for the opening remarks. Our first speaker is Renilde Niayi-Shimiye. Renilde is a member of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building and a researcher at the Institute for Agricultural Sciences in Burundi. Renilde is also in Burundi. She was formerly the national focal point of the UNFCCC. She was also the general director of the country's Geographic Institute and governor of Mwaro province. So quite a history that Renilde can tell us about. Outside of the professional world, Renilde likes to spend time at the Christian church, where she especially loves the singing part of it. So Renilde, we give the word to you and the floor to you to share your initial remarks. Thank you very much. And you have about 5 minutes, Renilde.
Thank you, Daniel. On behalf of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building and organizing partners, I am honored to welcome you to the Capacity Building Knowledge to Action Day for the African region. Today is the 4th time that we are organizing a workshop under this title, Two capacity building knowledge to action days took place during the regional climate weeks for Latin America and the Caribbean and Asia and the Pacific in 2019. And one global capacity building knowledge to action day was held at COP25 also last year. We are honored to be welcoming for the final part of this series today key stakeholders from the African region. Originally, the event was intended to be held in conjunction with the African Climate Week in 2020. However, due to the difficult situation surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic this year, we have decided with our partners to organize this workshop virtually instead. We believe the substantive experience with virtual meetings and events gained over the course of this year demonstrates that it's possible to have also fruitful and interactive discussions also in virtual format, and we greatly look forward to today's discussions with you all of you. We thank you all very much for your interest in contributing to this event. Let me now also, on behalf of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, express my sincere thanks to our partners for this workshop, without whose contributions and support today's events would not have been possible to organize. For today's event, we are honored to collaborate with the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection, the NAB Global Network, and IISD, the NDC Partnership, the Canadian International Development and Research Center, the Pan-African University Institute for Water and Energy Science, the Stockholm Environmental Institute, and the United Nations Universities Institute for Environmental and Human Security. We are very proud that the organizing partners of capacity building knowledge to action today, they depict a rich diversity of committee, national, regional, and international institutions that are working in the African region to raise climate ambition through collective efforts, action, and exchange of knowledge. The Capacity Building Knowledge to Action Day series was conceptualized with the aim to first provide a platform for relevant stakeholders at different world regions to establish cross-cutting dialogues and explore pathway and the opportunity for collaborative actions, enable exchange of national, regional, and international knowledge and experiences in identifying capacity gaps and need for the design and implementation of NABs and NDCs. And third, shed light on the central role of academia and research institutions in building and retaining capacities at national level. The findings of virtual event will be summarized and integrated into a joint report highlighting the outcomes and recommendations from all capacity building knowledge to action days organized in 2019 and 2020. The findings will also be reported at the next UNFCCC research dialogue. We should not forget that the outcomes and impact of this event are not confined to meeting rooms and formal reports. They are intended to be long-lasting and practical. I would like to share with you some of the key insights from the previous two regional workshops in 2019. In both workshops for the Asia, Pacific, and the Latin America and the Caribbean regions, the importance of inclusiveness in the production of and access to climate data and information were highlighted. Another notion was highlighted at both events was the resilience of university in the face of political change. There was agreement at both events that this feature gives the university the ability to sustain long visions, coordinate multi-actors efforts, build and return lasting capacities, as well as yield sustainable impact through national plans and the local actions. The question of capacity gaps in the university evoked similar responses in both workshops, emphasizing the importance, first, funding, secondly, transdisciplinary and collective efforts, and third, targeted communication of scientific findings. The significance of advocacy and communication in mainstreaming relevant climate knowledge to accelerate climate action was emphasized in both events. Institutional alignment, access to climate finance, networks and partnership, mapping existing effort and knowledge management were highlighted as prioritized action responses at both events. The outcome of both workshops also highlighted some of different priorities in the two regions with regard to the identifying priorities concerning data needs. First, participants in the LACCW emphasized the mapping of existing information and enhancing technical capacities for the interpretation of data. The dialogues in the APCW second were more focused on the importance of systemic data management and the necessity of generating data for vulnerability assessments at the local level in the context of loss and damage. With regard to the addressing capacity building knowledge to action gap, the discussions at the LACCW prioritized the institutional development and governance components of capacity building knowledge to action. The APCW event emphasized the importance of knowledge management systems and bottom-up approaches at local level. Now, on behalf of my colleagues, I welcome you again to the virtual capacity building knowledge to action day for the African region. I wish you all a very successful workshop and look forward to the outcomes of today's discussions. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Renilde. Really appreciate your words and setting the context, highlighting some of these key important things that should guide our discussion today. So much appreciated. We'll go directly to our second and final opening remark speaker. And I have the pleasure to introduce Shenaz Musa, who is the director of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network and of the not-for-profit South-South North. You may be surprised to hear this, but she started her career as a university lecturer in chemical engineering. In fact, as the first woman of color to obtain a PhD in engineering in South Africa, she knows firsthand the capacity building barriers that marginalized groups face. And I dare say that Shenaz also knows firsthand the challenges that mothers of 4 teenagers face. But she's found a really good way of coping with that, and I've learned recently that that is surfing. You heard that right. Shenaz is a surfer as well. So Shenaz, with that and with all your knowledge, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I always keep struggling to find the unmute button. I wouldn't call myself a surfer yet. I'm getting there. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shenaz, as Daniel said. I'm from the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. And just a quick background to the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, the CDKN. It's a knowledge brokering network that's a partnership between 3 Southern-based institutions. These are South-South-North, based in South Africa, FLA, based in Latin America, and ICLI South Asia, which is based in Asia. It's funded by the Canadian IDRC and the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. My presentation or the talk today is about challenges and opportunities that face capacity building in the Africa region, but I'm going to just contextualize it a bit and just talk through the definition of capacity building that informs the challenges and opportunities, and just give some examples of work that we as CDKN and South-South-North have done in Africa for the last over 10 years. So just to frame the definition I'll be talking to, and we prefer to call it capacity strengthening, and the underlying assumption there is that there is already existing capacity that you're strengthening. And so the definition we work with is that it's to strengthen capacity, or capacity strengthening is a process of collaboratively enhancing the ability of individuals, organizations, and institutions to articulate and achieve a certain set of goals. This is done through suitable and appropriate interventions, which include knowledge, skills, and systems, and they are aimed to meet a set of agreed upon targets and needs. So what we're talking to here is co-production and co-creating and completely demand-led. Recognition should also be given to the existing potential that exists, that's there, as well as the limitations. And that no capacity strengthening and building process is short-term. It's always medium to long-term. The examples that I'll talk through and that my talk is contextualized is the Climate and Development Knowledge Network Program, the Future Climate for Africa, the Southern African Climate Finance Partnership, and also support to the Africa group of negotiators that we've provided. And this has now been over a period of 10 years. And what we've seen from these 4 programs and how we've then started to adapt our approach is that there's 7 underlying principles that embed the capacity strengthening approach for the work in Africa that we've done. And most importantly for us is that everything is demand-led. We work with the recipient to determine what the needs are, and where the needs are not clear, to develop an approach to identify this with the recipient. It always has to be bottom-up and local ownership, which is co-produced. We've tried to always maintain a low ego approach, and often our work is not branded as capacity strengthening or even capacity building. So we go in a partnership way, work with governments, work with academic institutions, and we partner to deliver capacity strengthening, but it's never called. So we don't go in and say, we're going to build your capacity now. What we've also noticed is that the power dynamics has to be managed very, very delicately and actively. Also, that capacity building is built iteratively, and it's never a once-off intervention, especially if you want it to be sustainable. Linked to capacity strengthening and building is the institutional capability, where activity should not only focus on individuals, but should be embedded in the institution to ensure longevity. And then what we've also realized is what's needed for the sustainability of capacity in Africa is that Southern leadership has to be promoted, and this also has to be done actively. So I just want to run you through a few quick examples of some innovative approaches that we use in capacity building or strengthening in our work across the 4 programs, and then talk about the challenges and opportunities. So all the work that was done on CDKN was always demand-driven. It always came from a place of asking the recipients, what is it? What would you like done in partnership? And often then it translated into capacity building. So it never was, what capacity do you need? But that's where it ended up. There was quite a bit done on climate financing, where government institutions, the private sector, the GCF, so a range of stakeholders got together and would work through real examples of, for example, how to apply for climate finance for a project. What we also found was very, very impactful was games, and particularly around understanding how the climate impacts and how to include climate scenarios into decision making. And a lot of this has continued. And we, for example, we're now developing a game in Ethiopia to look at how you include gender into climate, into decision making. Another piece of quite impactful capacity strengthening was taking the latest IPCC science, translating that into usable products that that we then disseminated and presented to African journalists. They then took it further. So their capacity was built to communicate what was coming out of the IPCC work. And then one of our most recent interventions, which was with the CDKN and Future Climate for Africa, is what we call the Wiki Editathon. So what we realized is there was a huge gap in the knowledge and information that was being presented on Wikipedia. It was all Northern based. There was very, very few interventions from African scientists, African climate scientists. So I'm talking about the climate, African climate data and science. We then held an event where we got the Wiki Foundation to support, and we got a whole lot of researchers together where we actually, they got taken through a process of entering into Wikipedia themselves. This was done the beginning of last year, and it has been continuous. So our intervention hasn't been continuous, but the impact has been. Most of those scientists and researchers who were at that workshop have continued to update the wiki pages as new information becomes available. And I think that, yeah, for me, that is such a nice example of where capacity strengthening has become embedded, and there's a legacy there. An example of a more sustained sort of capacity strengthening intervention is what we do with the Climate Finance Partnership, which is now also currently funded by the Canadian IDRC, where we take government decision makers on a 3-year learning journey. During that journey, we have bilateral exchanges, we have peer-to-peer learning, with the ultimate intention of them being able to access climate funding by themselves, not relying on Northern-based consultants or even on other sorts of intervention. This has also proved to be remarkably successful. We're now in the 3rd phase of this program. So just bringing all that back, and now talking about the challenges and the opportunities that's that's facing us in the Africa region. And often the challenges do outweigh the opportunities. And so we're sitting with that again here. I think one of the big challenges that we noticed is that there's largely a unidirectional flow within capacity building activities from the north to Africa. It often doesn't take into consideration the vast and rich expertise within Africa, and often the activities are not suited or contextualized, and they're inappropriate. What we found, and I'm sure many other organizations experience the same thing, is the difficulty with finding African experts. And this is not due to them not being African experts, but I think it's due to the fact that there's not the same access to networking opportunities for African experts. When we look at the way that capacity building activities are performed, they're often one-day training or week-long workshops, and they're not at all effective to build real capacity, because capacity building is a process, and it's actually embedded in another process. So for example, what I showed on the learning journeys on SACFP3, what is also important that trust and relationships are built over a time, and that the capacity and capability is then embedded. Often also, when capacity building is done in a workshop setting, the training doesn't speak to the participants there. And often you get the sense the participants are being talked down to, and it's just a waste of their time. One that we've come across and that we actively try to engage with and manage is that there's a divergence of priorities between the North, which is your donors and so, and developing countries on what areas should be prioritized for capacity building activities and what the overall priorities are. And often they don't align, and this is where the approach of listening to demand and responding to demand comes in strongly. So I've just given you 4 challenges. I'm going to give you 2 opportunities, and hopefully the rest of the sessions, we build on these opportunities and we see how we can make them a reality for turning knowledge into real action. So in terms of opportunities, what we realize strongly is that we should be utilizing the knowledge that already exists within Africa and African expertise, and especially the peers, and look at peer-to-peer capacity building activities. This will result in assistance and support that is appropriate for the region. It also keeps more of the finances and the money within Africa. It grows the knowledge and expertise from the South. It also enables the climate change world to be more exposed to Southern experts who can often not afford the cost to attend international conferences, and which precludes them from the networking arena. So this is responding to the challenges that were presented, that I just presented. And then also to work collegially and as equal partners between North and South. And I think this is an important one. And this is also where the shift, there is a shift towards this, but there is still a way to go. So climate change is a wicked problem. We all know this. And we need to combine forces. The intellectual ability and creativity to meet these problems sits in the North and the South. Africa has many valuable lessons for Europe and the US, as does Europe and the US have many lessons for Africa. But however, there needs to be some sort of an equal exchange that is multi-directional, and it is underpinned with the premise that all partners have value and expertise to give. And with that, I'd like to now hand over back to Daniel, but to say let the sessions that we're going into look at this working collegially and opening up spaces for true partnership. Thank you, Daniel, and I'm going to try and stop sharing. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shanaz. Really appreciate your words, and I think that Renilde's and now your words really gonna frame the whole next the discussions that are to follow. And with no intention to summarize yours in any way, but just to say a couple of things that I will also then emphasize the panelists and then the group discussions, is that idea that you talk about the capacity building, capacity strengthening, not necessarily labeling that as the key activity, but really thinking about partnerships for learning, right? This South-led work and equal exchange. I think that in a way, that democratization of knowledge, of research, of capacity strengthening is something that is tremendously important. And that I'd like to definitely keep then on the table. So thanks again, Shanaz. Thanks, Renilde, for your very important words. A key comment, or a quick comment rather, that please rename yourselves if you haven't already done so. This is important because our colleagues working in the background need that information in order to put you in the right breakout group in a few minutes. So if you haven't, please do that. Okay, we're gonna move immediately now to the panel discussion. What we're gonna be doing in that panel is, well, moving along the same line of thinking we've been having since we started, is exploring lessons learned from different perspectives, what solutions, what opportunities, what challenges and barriers these speakers have found in their experience from their perspective, from government, from research, from youth activism, from civil society organizations. What are they finding that are opportunities and challenges for forwarding climate agenda, climate action? And particularly what role capacity strengthening, knowledge, research has for it. So I think in the discussion, we'll be touching on subjects around power, institutions, governance, power dynamics, power sharing. How does that, really building on the discussions we've just had with, or the interventions from Ranilde and Shenaz. During the panel discussion, I welcome you to share your questions at any time in the chat. So my colleague Cameron, he will be taking note of these questions, and then he will try to merge your questions, and then I'll be able to ask them to the panelists. So at any time, please start typing in your questions, and then we'll get to that after the discussion. Before we start with the question, then I'll introduce the four panelists. I'd like to start with Elizabeth Kulugulu, and we're really thrilled to have her here. She's an ambassador for the African Youth Climate Hub, and she's also project manager for the African Youth Initiative on Climate Change in Zimbabwe. She's highly experienced in youth mobilization and is a researcher in sustainable agriculture. Elizabeth loves traveling, appreciating different cultures, and tasting different foods, which of course makes the actual pandemic situation a bit tougher for people like Elizabeth, but we'll get there, Elizabeth. Our second panelist is Kekgone Baipoledi, who I will refer to as Eddie. Eddie is the Deputy Permanent Secretary responsible for research, science, and technology at Botswana's Ministry of Tertiary Education, Research, Science, and Technology. So we're really thrilled to have you on board, Eddie. Thanks so much. Eddie serves as a vice chair as well of the UN's Commission of Science and Technology for Development. Now, that sounds already quite busy, but as if that wasn't enough, Eddie loves grounded things like farming. He himself is a farmer, but he also loves more abstract ones, such as exploring the universe's unknown forces and raising his 4 children. We have, as a panelist as well, Isane El Marwani. Isane is Senior Manager of the Air Climate Program at Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection. She's also experienced in environmental impacts on populations' health. Isane promotes education and training for environment and sustainable development to the general public, which I think is also quite relevant to what we're doing here today. And finally, another equally important thing about Isane, she loves dogs, as do I. Welcome, Isane. Thank you for being here. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Chris Gordon. He's the founding director of the Institute for Environmental and Sanitation Studies at the University of Ghana, and the CDKN country engagement lead for that beautiful country as well. He has over 35 years of experience in teaching, research, and outreach in the areas of limnology. I had to Google that, by the way, but it's something to do with research of lakes, aquatic resource management, coastal wetlands, climate change, environmental science, and sustainability. And above all, Chris does not like long introductions, so I better stop right now. Great, let's get started. I'd like to see if all of the 4 panelists can turn on your videos, so hopefully participants will be able to see your face as well as we have the discussion. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question for Eddie and Chris. And the question is the following. Eddie, could you tell us about 1 or 2 things that you have found helpful in promoting collaboration between people like yourself in government positions, research institutions, and non-government actors? So what has helped this collaboration flourish? Over to you, Eddie.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you and good morning or afternoon to everybody on the platform. I'm talking to you from Botswana, just next door to Shanaz in South Africa. What I can say then, and which I think is a very good question, is that helpful hints to promoting collaboration between research and other players in the space. Our experience has been that you need, first of all, to build networks. You've got to find networks that are either thematic or are influenced by certain characteristics of those. For example, you may have networks of innovators, or you may have network of institutions of higher learning, or institutions involved particularly in research. So when it's built around that, it tends to get people to coalesce around similar thoughts and similar equipment and infrastructure. The other one, which we have found in Botswana as has been working very, very well, is funding. When you provide funding as a magnet to draw players in a particular space, and they come together. Of course, as Botswana, we haven't yet established a very good funding system for research or for institutional work in particular subjects, whether it's climate or it's education or health and the like. And we have just started steps towards that. But we have seen that those that are funded by donors, for example, external funding, they tend to congregate around that particular funding who is driving a particular agenda. It could be in climate change, it could be in environmental issues, which could be of relevance in that particular space. For example, as Botswana, we do have wetlands, for example. We have registered at an international level our wetland, the greatest one, Okavango Delta. And those people who are involved in wetland research will tend to come together and find themselves being supported through international donorship, which is in the space relating to wetlands. And that is what has tended to foster collaboration. But of course, there are ups and downs for those approaches. If you have your own funding, you tend to direct your own research agenda, or at least make it more relevant to your needs. That is what we have seen happening for us over the years in Botswana. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, Eddie. That's great insight. Appreciate it. Let's see also then what Chris has to share with us in that perspective, which will be really interesting, particularly because then he comes from the research side of life, as well as his very much research and impact focus through his work in CDKN as well. Chris?
Thank you for the opportunity, first of all, and greetings to all the many names I see of people I've worked with in the past. I hope everybody's staying safe in these difficult times. All of these things for collaboration start off with the issue of trust and respect. And if you do not have that trust and respect of the partners you're working with, there is an issue. We also need to realize that every day should be a learning experience, so that there are always opportunities for mutual learning when you're working with partners, whether they be academic, non-governmental, or from the government sector. People look at things in different ways, and we need to be open to that. The third point I'd like to bring in is we have to appreciate that no one mind can understand everything, so that there are different experiences which would bring expertise that is complementary to what you have as a way of moving forward. Many of the things that I do myself actually start off with conversations with students who have incredibly good ideas, but they need to have the space to express them, or with traditional communities who have been practicing many generations of science, though they do not call it science. We have to be able to learn from them by considering them equal partners. Now, we also need to accept the value and the need for the translation of knowledge and of knowledge brokerage. If we cannot impart our knowledge to our collaborators or them to us, there's a problem. And I would like to bring in another aspect. You've asked for things helpful in collaboration, but one of the big problems is the arrogance of many scientists, especially those who are coming from what are known as the hard scientists, math, physics, climate science, modeling. But I am of the view that if you understand your subject, you should be able to go to a kindergarten class and express your knowledge, and the class will understand you. And the last point that I like to raise is the fact that we have to appreciate that collaboration and partnerships increase access to different groups, i.e., to communities where you need a wayfinder or some sort of gatekeeper who will let you into that community. And by working with respect with governments, you have a good access to the people who are going to take the decisions and actually translate that knowledge into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate all your words and how these kind of invisible forces that you talk about, they're so tremendously important. I had the pleasure of working for 5 years in a research project with Chris, and I can attest that all he talks about, he also implements. So that's the other important part, right? You talk the talk, but you walk the walk. So thanks so much for that, Chris. And in fact, when Chris started to talk about problems, that's the focus of the next question that I'd like to put forth to Isane and Elizabeth. And the question let's start with perhaps with you, Isane, is which one, again, or two things have you found to be hindering effective collaboration across the sectors of or stakeholders? So whereas Eddie and Chris focus a little bit on the positives, we put to you a question that is quite challenging because it's talking about the challenges, and I know that can be a little bit harder. Over to you, Isane. Thanks.
Je te remercie Daniel, merci à tout le monde. Tout d'abord, je souhaite la bienvenue à tous les participants ici présents.
Very much, Daniel.
Et je tiens à vous féliciter
Welcome to all the participants,
pour la protection de l'environnement,
to all of
de
them.
savoir impliquer dans l'organisation.
So, in the name of Foundation Mohammed VI, thank you very much.
Même virtuellement cet événement.
The interpreter is having difficulty hearing the speaker.
Ne le permet pas physiquement.
The current context is very difficult. It's a particular question to reply to the different themes. But for me, what's difficult, the most important is the communication. So with our sector, the way we can talk, this is of course a very difficult situation, but we need to make things coherent and put them together. So we're at the national level. We can't, of course, all this comes back to the fact that we need to enhance capacity and develop capacity with information and make information available so that we can go a bit further. Our foundation is working on this since the creation of the Accords. we're trying to mobilize and federate the different partners. We to align the different actors with a positive, common objective. So that's these are our objectives at the moment. So everyone has his or her own contribution to make to build together. To give you an example, we're working more concretely with the private sector, and we are going to build up a charter. We're going to work at national level to facilitate the deployment of different projects. So, of course, I think that, like you all, it's a participation. We need to base that on capacity building and information which will enable us to advance and to build together with to co-create projects and to meet our objectives when we can.
The media are also a very important channel in order to inform the population. And here we have, for example, we're in touch with the journalists. And this is something that's important at African level. And it's basically going to enable us on the African continent to inform the public. So, anyways, you were talking about a second challenge. You talked about youth. Well, yes, obviously, youth is a very important element in this equation. It's very important to commit and really include youth. And there's a platform for youth in Africa, and with us and another ambassador, we really were pondering all the advantages of these actions, and I think it's very important for us to be able to listen to what our youth have to say.
Merci bien, Isane. Je pense que vous avez très raison. Thank you very much. All of these very important points around communication, building that space, creating that space for engagement, and likewise to connect with youth. And I think on that point of connecting with youth, you'll find an ally in our next panelist, Elizabeth, who I'd like to pose the same question to you, Elizabeth, around things that you've seen hindering this collaboration from your perspective.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, Isan, for paving the way for me. My name is Elizabeth, an ambassador for the African Youth Climate Hub.
A bit louder, Elizabeth. Sorry to interrupt you. Just a bit louder or closer to the mic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Isan, for paving the way for me. My name is Elizabeth Kulugulu, an ambassador for the African Youth Climate Hub. And this is a hub for young people that focuses on research, knowledge, and exchanging information, capacitating young African people when it comes to building back better, as we have been affected by the global pandemic, COVID-19, and good entrepreneurship skills when it comes to green businesses. But some of the challenges that we have been facing in our line of work as young people are competing claims or conflicting priorities across different kind of sectors. Because if you get to look at the private sector, they are more concerned on profits. And if you get to focus on the CSOs or the youth organizations, they are more concerned on sustainability. And we have the government, which is more concerned on coming up with good policies. But these all these objectives, at times they are a bit conflicting. And that's why it is important to come up together and have coordinated efforts, which is the reason why we have Goal 17, which is partnership of the goals, for us to achieve and for us to mainstream climate-related issues and achieve the national adaptation plans and the nationally determined contributions. Another challenge which I have faced, which we have faced as the African youth, when we are engaging with stakeholders that are in the game, by in the game, I mean in those stakeholders that are into climate-related issues, it's the lack of clear governance framework for sectorial cross-cutting issues. For example, I'll give you an example. I'm from Zimbabwe, and we are in the process of renewing our nationally determined contributions. Our nationally determined contributions are focusing on 4 sectors, which is the energy sector, the waste sector, the agricultural sector, and the industry sector. So imagine these are totally 4 different sectors, 4 different ministries. And there is lack of clear governance framework. How are we going to engage these different ministries so that they are on the same level? We are on the same board when you're talking about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So these are some of the issues, because climate-related issues are cross-cutting, and it is of vast importance to engage young people when it comes to nationally adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions. But this will be easy if the framework, there's a clear framework when it comes to cross-cutting issues on climate-related issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And you point to really important things around that alignment of priorities. And I think it touches on the points that some of you have been raising already around the language, right? And understanding that we're all going in the same direction, and really that everyone's case is actually, hopefully, can build towards the same direction as you're describing, whether you're private sector, CSO, government, researcher, and so on. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'd like to turn now for the second round of questions, and because of time, I'd like to ask you to be to stick to the 2 minutes as much as possible, please, for your answer from now on. And the third question I'd like to put first to Chris and then to Eddie. Chris, what is your experience in using different or several instruments, approaches to collaboration? And here we're talking about whether that approach is a formal partnerships, ad hoc dialogues, vertical collaborations, learning fora. What are the different instruments and approaches that you found work best? Or is it always just case by case?
Okay, well, I would say it's very much case by case, and it depends very much on the sort of partners that you have. I'm a former dean of international programs of my university, so we had to deal with over 200 other universities in terms of partnerships and collaboration. But I think whatever instrument is used, there are some key issues that need to be encompassed in them. One is that you need agreements that are equitable. The preparation of the instrument needs to be transparent. There should be clear stated expectations which are realistic. There should be some sort of exit strategy, and you should always look at the long term, not just the period of the agreement, but how it goes into the future. Some of our agreements at the university have been running for 50 years plus. So I think if you have these in your mind, it doesn't really matter what sort of agreement or instrument it does. If it has been developed using that initial thing I spoke, trust and respect, it shall work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. I really like it because it's the how, and it's the principles behind it. It's the transparency, the goodwill in a way behind it. Over to you, Eddie, to see whether you agree or disagree with Chris.
Thank you very much, Ben. I cannot speak from the point of view of a university, because as you realize, I'm at the senior level in government. We look at facilitating state-to-state collaborations, and having established those cooperation frameworks, then institutions across our states, across member states, then build their own relationship. And what we do at the international level is to sign into conventions or to ratify treaties on behalf of the state. And these are long term. I mean, they could be lifelong, basically, as long as the environment between states does not change. We sign into protocols that could be either regional, like from where I'm coming from, we have a regional organization, the Southern Africa Development Community, which has about 15 member states. And therefore, member state bilateral arrangement would be facilitated at our level. And or you could actually have specific matter that we are dealing with. And what we have been doing is to then enter into a memorandum of understanding where there's a particular subject. For example, we are looking at either climate issues or we're looking at science and research, whether it be research in health space or whichever space that we're looking at. Then a memorandum of understanding will facilitate that. Or particularly, we could have a memorandum of agreement, but this one, we encourage it to be done at the institutional level. For example, a university here in Botswana will enter into a memorandum of agreement with the university in Ghana or the university in South Africa or wherever, because they have a particular relationship that they want to build. And that is what we will facilitate at government level. And those are the instruments that at our level we use. We don't have informal ones. Government to government, we will not have informal agreements, but certainly we can have leader to leader dialogue, and then that is translated into formal agreements thereafter. So that is how we work and facilitate the environment for researchers to do their work sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. That's fantastic, and I think that there's the beauty of this collaboration that we're talking about. There's, depending on who you are, who you're representing, and there's different channels and different areas of impact as well. So I think what you bring up is also that formal level of agreement, of understanding of vehicles that are also so important for pushing national and supranational goals. So thanks very much for that. I'll go to the final question to our panels, back to Elizabeth first and then Isane. And what I'd like to consult with you is, from your perspective, what skills help to work better with actors outside of your initial circle, right? And promote effective climate action. So sometimes, we know very well how to work amongst our little bubble, so to speak. But when we have to work with stakeholders that are have that different vision and perspective of the world or of the problem, then we face troubles. So what skills help you overcome these potential barriers? Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for the question. And it's a very good question. And one of the skills we have used is to organize ourselves. You'd find out that in the world, there are a lot of youth movements that are happening, climate-related issues when it comes to advocacy. But for us to have a huge impact, we need to put ourselves in order and identify the gaps that are there. So for instance, we have identified the gaps and we've engaged our policymakers so as to try to bridge the gaps that are there, because you find out that most young people, they are working in the vulnerable communities. They are the ones that are implementing the projects when it comes to national adaptation plans, mitigation projects. So we have identified the gap that is there, and we have engaged our policymakers, our decision makers, so that when they are negotiating for our natural resources, they actually know and consider that they are young people that are doing the work, and at times they engage us. So we are not only doing the work on the ground, but we are also involved when it comes to negotiations, because this is what we call sustainability. After 5 years or 10 years from now, we need African young people who are able to negotiate for their natural resources and who are able to negotiate for climate-related issues. So these are some of the skills that we've used, advocacy, and we've identified gaps. We have engaged policymakers through volunteerism. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And I think you really highlight something important, which is also around having open spaces, having democratic spaces for discussions that enable actually these messages to go beyond the original group that it represents, right? And something to what others in the discussion, like even Shanaz in her initial comments, referred to. So thanks for bringing that really grounded experience, Elizabeth. And Isane, over to you to also give us your perspective. If you could keep it to 2 minutes, we'd appreciate. Over to you. Merci, Isane.
Thank you for this very interesting question. Indeed, there are many actors which are included, and donc I would like to talk about different elements here. You have whatever is on the terrain, and it's very important so that we have adapted answers to these different problems.
Tu disais tout à l'heure, Chinese, par rapport aux formations. Certes, il y a des formations et des ateliers qui sont réalisés, mais qui ne correspondent pas parfaitement.
There's a lot of actions that should be undertaken. So the interpreter has a really hard time to hear the speaker. There's a lot of echo where she is. The sound is very low, so we can hardly hear. The interpreter hardly hears the speaker.
Il faut aller adapter ce contenu-là, aller vers des recherches plus spécifiques au niveau des territoires.
The training is also very important. There's the Agency for Development, and at the level of the companies, we also need to do something through, for example, the implementation of carbon schemes, so carbon emission objectives. It's very important to include and involve local actors. And it's very important to train, as I was saying earlier. And these pilot projects allow basically to elaborate a roadmap in order to reach these objectives, and we need to really provide some really practical training. And this international, this foundation, Mohammed VI Foundation for the Environment, is really there to promote this work, both in terms of research and development. And we also do some remote training, online training, so that we can reach out to the different communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isane. We appreciate your very comprehensive approach to the topic. So thanks very much indeed. Now we're going to move to the Q&A session, and I will be putting some questions directly to you, which have been summarized by my colleagues in the background. Isane, for your case, when you are responding, just to make a note that to please speak a bit louder and perhaps a little bit slower for the interpretation services to be able to capture you better. So, because there was a little bit of an echo. So thanks for that. Okay. So the first question that I'd like to put to panelists, people have been saying, this is great. We would like to hear more specific experiences on how you have bridged research and policy gaps. So the question, there's two specific questions, one to Eddie and one to Chris. To Eddie, the question is, can you share interesting experiences across Africa that bridges this research outputs with institutions that have led to policy implementation, policy impact? Over that one to you, Eddie. And to Chris, the question is, the person says, it's great that you mentioned the need to value knowledge brokerage. There is a gap between scientists as knowledge producers and the numerous knowledge users. So most project models do not include funding and support for knowledge brokerage, but this should be important. So that issue of knowledge brokerage, how to prioritize knowledge brokerage. Let me start with that first, if you will, first you, Eddie, and then Chris. And a reminder to please try to keep it as concise as you can.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for the question. I don't think I can put a finger on a particular policy that I can speak to, but certainly because we belong to various international organizations, we have been influenced by the general global trends and decisions, whether in the space of environmental issues through our ministry responsible for environment. When you look at what has been decided at the high level at Paris meetings, for example, or you realize that we also respond to what has been decided at the regional level in terms of either it is industrialization policy or so. As a country, we have been taking these conventions and putting them to using them to inform our policies. But we want our own researchers. We want our own institutions do work that can be able to inform us in terms of whether we adopt these international conventions into our legislation and our policies. We should be informed by the domestic and regional situation. And this is what now we are working on to try and align. That's where the capacity for us as a country lie in terms of translating international conventions into domestic needs and seeing what exactly are the gaps at local level and be able to inform our national policies and national legislation to allow research to flourish. So we need that support, and not only to import, as Shanaz was saying, not only to import from the north to the south by way of conventions and treaties which are at global level. We can learn from there, but we should have our own experiences, regional and local. I think that's the example that I can give at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Specifics. Thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Eddie. That's very clear. And I think, again, you highlight that point between connection between national or supranational, national, and even local. And I dare to bring a point also here. I think some of our colleagues today present are from the University of Botswana. Will also probably in their group discussion be able to bring some of the examples of a project that I'm aware of that where they kind of try to kind of bring then that level of national to local level implementation and local level implementation to policy. So I think maybe there will be an opportunity for our colleagues to bring that up in the group discussion. Chris, over to you on the knowledge brokerage prioritization challenge.
Okay, well, it's very simple. For Africa, most of our research, perhaps with the exception of South Africa, is driven by donor funding. So if we want to have, or we appreciate that knowledge brokerage is important, the funding calls and the criteria for winning proposals needs to contain a requirement for a knowledge brokerage component. This is why gender now features in most project proposals. This is why outreach to communities features, simply because the donors are the ones directing what we should do. Now, we can tell them that this is what we want in a project at the level of government, or we can decide not to respond to calls if the proposal does not, the call does not include certain elements. There is another way of doing this, and I call it twinning. Several politicians from both sides of the political divide in Ghana have contacted me at different times for advice. And they see me as a, in quotes, go-to person when they need advice on issues of environment and climate. So I think one of the things we can do to break this particular barrier is to be available, if not better, reach out to people in the NGO world or in the government world and share your knowledge with them and be open to media when they ask for information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very much agree, Chris. Appreciate it. Thanks. We have a separate question here, another question, which is around, and I'd like to put this question first of all to Isan and Elizabeth, is how do you effectively collaborate between parties, you know, from a North perspective or a South perspective and in between North and South, particularly when some of the interests or some of the agendas that are hidden behind that are not always clear, right? So how do you, it comes down surely to the point of building trust and all of that, but how can you break that trust? Because sometimes you have very little time. How do you make a collaboration happen with hidden agendas or different priorities in a limited amount of time that you have, and also to make sure that you serve your own interests? It's a big one. I realize it's a big question, but Elizabeth, Isane, whoever wants to go first, be my guest. It's a tough one, isn't it? Let me put, if you're in hesitation for that one, let me present another option here for you, so you can answer either that or a question which also came, which is a bit more direct, which is what are the enabling factors, from your opinion, to lead to effective collaboration? So we have talked a little bit about that, but there's some people that are particularly interested in the North-South collaboration part of it.
I think can I speak?
Please, yes. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay, I would want to respond to the first question. I was waiting for Isani, my senior, to speak first. So first and foremost, I wanted to say this is the role of the hub, African Youth Climate Hub, which it has been playing, making sure that it is creating safe spaces for young people to collaborate from the West, global South, and the global North. And I would also encourage respective ministries and relevant stakeholders to sort of like replicate the same model which the hub has been using, to have local hubs within our own countries that are focusing on climate-related issues, which can probably help us when in terms of partnership. And not only partnership, because it's not a matter of partnership, but it's a matter of sustainable partnership. So if we are getting into partnership, let's say we want to access some climate finance, the terms of references should be clear and should not be sort of like suppressing the other side or the other end. And if there is a hub, it can actually assist with making this kind of, sustainable collaborations and this sustainable partnership, so that we can actually have some access to climate finance to mitigate and adapt to the mitigation, to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Very much appreciate that feedback. Isan, would you like to add? Go ahead, Isan.
Bien sûr, Daniel. Je te remercie infiniment et je compléterai en fait à ce qui a été dit. Bien sûr, la confiance est bien sûr un point très important.
I would like to complete what has been said
ceci dit, il y a lieu aussi de traiter les deux régions nord et sud de manière très égale, de pouvoir travailler ensemble et de réfléchir ensemble.
Very important regarding the North and South
region. Participative et collaborative à travers une coopération.
It is very important for these two regions to act together.
Qui soit adapté à la région, bien sûr.
On concrete projects.
C'est une vraiment approche inclusive et intersectorielle.
Obviously,
helping
the impact of climate change on the southern region.
Ce partenariat nord-sud. Ainsi, il y a lieu de réfléchir ensemble sur les aspects.
Obviously, must play their role. They must have their space within this partnership.
En termes de formation, en termes d'expertise également. Comme on le sait, il y a beaucoup d'experts du Sud qui sont très performants, qui sont très
there are a lot of experts in the southern
également apporter leur contribution dans toute cette coopération globale. Donc du coup, oui,
and
il y a
who
lieu
can obviously bring all their contribution
de régions d'égal à égal, de travailler en commun accord et avec des aspects.
And I think that it is also crucial to treat both regions, North and South, as equals, as equal partners.
Yep. Merci bien. Thank you so much. Isane. Appreciate it. We've had really good, interesting discussions. We won't, and I apologize, we won't have the opportunity to go to a live QA session. I know some people have come up, and I encourage you to bring those points in your breakout group discussions to follow. I will give each panelist, and literally, I'm sorry, but 30, 45 seconds for a closing statement. And Chris, when you do that, I know you wanted to comment on the covert question, so maybe you can use the time for expanding on that. And I know it's not a lot of time, but let me do that if I may. So I'd like to propose this order: Eddie, Elizabeth, Isane, and we close with Chris, if that works for you. So remember, keep it 30, 45 seconds. And thanks so much in advance for your great participation, your great insights. Eddie, you're on mute. Your mic is muted.
Thank you, Dan. I would like to quickly support or add a voice on what Isane was saying, that when we go into these partnerships, and as my parting shot, we should really see ourselves as equal partners. And I think Chris also touched on that. Equal partners. We may not have the same quantum of input into the partnership, but we are bringing knowledge, we are bringing building relationship, we are building capacities. And in that relationship, honestly speaking, let's see ourselves as equal partners. And there shouldn't be a donor and receiver relationship. It will not take us far. And we do have experts in our region, in the southern region. Let's have that South-South relationship and collaborations, and the triangular partnerships are necessary in this instance. They will help us to build our capacities. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Eddie. Elizabeth?
Thank you so much, Danielle. And I want to say that young people are not threats. So we have respective government officials and people from the civil society. It's good not to look down at young people, but rather to support them. The energy that they have is amazing. All you need is to channel that energy into the right direction. So yeah, those are my last words.
Well, I love your last words, and I'm sure there will be a lot more. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's really great. Isane?
Oui, je serai très brève. Juste pour vous
dire a bit louder, Isane.
Yes. Juste pour vous dire que l'éducation et la formation, puisqu'on en a parlé au
that education and training that we've talked about are our objectives, and it's fundamental to transform positively our relationships in our region and to aim to get to our objectives. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isane, and sorry about the issue with the mic, but we heard you crystal clear. Appreciate it. Thanks very much. Chris, over to you.
Okay, well, the covert question, people can only do that if you do not know your business. And you can only command respect if you are truly an equal partner. So I would encourage the young people and the early career scientists is know your subject, know it deeply, know it well. Do not be afraid to cross disciplines, because maybe you need to know something about governance as well as climate modeling to understand the ramifications of your work. Get out of your comfort zone. Thank you.
I think those words really summarize this whole discussion. Get out of your comfort zone, be brave in a sense, and and it's also the responsibility at all levels to make that space open, to make that governance welcoming, and so everybody has to kind of push from their side, but an environment has to be created to support that as well. So thanks so much. I really appreciated everyone's contribution. I thought it was incredibly insightful. And with that as a food for thought for the panels, we can now move into that session. So I'd like to ask you, Cesar, if you could share the screen, the slide where we have the number of the groups. Thanks so much, Eddie. Thanks so much, Isane. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate it. So we're going to be moving then to the panel, to the breakout sessions immediately. And what we would like to put forward is a reflection, really have a reflection on what you just heard, share your experiences. A lot of key questions came where you wanted to share more, and I appreciate that, and we all do. So now is your time to do that in your breakout group session, which will then be shared with the plenary. If we could have the slide 1 second with the five groups, that would be fabulous. Because I just wanted to give a mention to, you will be assigned directly to one of these groups, but I do, if you give me 30 seconds, I do want to mention the names of everyone here, because everybody has done has dedicated quite a bit of time to put all this together. So for breakout group 1, it'll be, it'll be Philip. Sorry, Cesar, I'm seeing your chat at the moment. It'll be Philip, Simone, and Anderson. For breakout room 2, it'll be Lilian, Alejandro, and Khadija. For breakout room 3, it'll be Margaret, Emmanuel, and Gabriel. Breakout 4 will be Ayman, Henilde, and Hamza. And for the breakout group 5, Marie-Ève, Abdelrani, and Bruce. And groups 4 and 5 are in French, by the way. I finally do want to make a mention as well, also of my colleagues from the IISD NAP Global Network who've been working in the background as well. They are Gloria, Cesar, and that has been able to put all this together. So you will soon be instructed to move into your breakout group. You'll have about, I believe, 45 minutes. We may have to make a little change to that, but we'll then see you here again to hear what you concluded and came up with. Thanks so much for your great participation so far. Do not leave the meeting option yet or ever. So just wait for your redirectioning instruction, which should pop up in your screen.
Dear speakers, I'm here to just thank you again for your contribution at this point. We didn't have your name assigned to any of the groups, but I just was wondering if you're available to stay longer with us, or if not, we can have you either back in the plenary when the discussion is over in 35 minutes, or call it a day. Hi, Daniel, you're back. I was putting my feet in your shoes. So I was just saying that if speakers are available to stay with us for longer, we're happy to have them.
Yeah.
So just to let you know that you can join any group if you want. All of you guys are co-hosted, so you can hop from one group to another to take a look at what is being discussed. Okay.
Actually, yes, I have another meeting now with the Consortium for Natural Resources and Disaster, which has started. So I would give my apologies that I have to leave now, and thank Daniel and the whole team for a great job. I've sent the Deputy PS an email message about Botswana and Hillary, how wicked he is. But I wish you all well.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you very much, Chris. I can only stay up until 5 minutes to 2 because I am to attend another meeting at 2 o'clock, which is about close to 20 minutes from now. So yes, I can listen into one of the groups and then leave if you don't mind. I've appreciated the interaction, and I'm available for any further interaction because we are building our ecosystem here in Botswana. We would like to have you also participating with us. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eddie. Thank you so much for being part of this, and it was really great intervention. So thanks again.
Yeah.
Caesar, how do we join a group? You said we co-host, so we should be able to, and I can't work out how.
Who's talking? Shanaz?
Yes, it's Shanaz. Sorry, Shanaz.
Sorry. You are co-host, so you can just click on the breakout groups options here on the bar at the bottom.
Okay.
And you see all the groups, and there is a blue button saying join, and you can join any of them anytime.
Okay, thank you.
It's all the groups, okay, because you are a co-host.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Isane, and will you be able... OK, j'essaye le français. Est-ce que vous pouvez rester avec nous pour le reste de l'émission ou n'est pas possible pour vous?
Ici, je vais rester avec vous et je vais rejoindre justement un autre groupe pour écouter la discussion.
OK, merci. Je vais faire la même chose.
Okay.
Hello, everyone, again, and welcome back to the plenary. I think everybody is back now. Apologies for maybe the shock return. It feels like maybe not as bad as an emergency landing, but a little bit of a turbulence happening in our return to the plenary. So apologies for breaking your conversations. I've heard like really super interesting discussions going on, and now you'll have the opportunity to share back group by group, one representative from each group, back to the plenary. Sorry that we had to shorten the session by a few minutes because of the time. And also, I want to ask you all, please, if you can, to stay a few minutes after the original time, because so that we have the opportunity to wrap it up. So we're hoping to go out until 45 minutes past the hour. Without further ado, because you're the one who has more interesting things to say, I'd like to start group 1 and then all the way to group 5. And I'll give you the representative from each group 3 minutes, and I'll put a timer here. And when the timer comes out, I will ask you to really wrap it up. It's 3 minutes for you to bear that in mind. And hopefully then at the end, we'll have a chance to have a quick discussion. Group 1 representative, the floor is yours whenever you are ready, and I'll start counting.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll just like give some of the key points that we brought up in our group discussion. With response to options to promote climate action, the first point was to about bringing information and impacting knowledge within the community, as well as building relationships between all different stakeholders that are involved in the project. Secondly, they also talked about building interdisciplinary networks with universities, research institutions, the private sector, so that they can collaborate as one, as an entity moving forward. And after doing that, then these networks have to engage with policymakers to make sure that they actually translate what they found in science into policy. Then there's also one key important issue, which is about policy enablers in terms of infrastructure and human resources to actually translate all the research findings into policies, because without this one, it'd be difficult to actually move on with these research agendas. Then there's also a major issue of consultative process, whereby we bring together all the stakeholders in a consultative process, universities, research institutions, and all the other stakeholders, the private sector, to come out with concrete solutions on the way forward. For example, that was done in Rwanda, when they were developing their NDCs. Then one other key issue was that most calls actually provide like their priorities and the agendas. So one of the participants actually made mention that if there's something that you really want to put forward, you have to call. There's always like a contact number for those calls. You can easily call back the donor and tell them exactly what you want to do. For example, the example he gave was that, for example, they wanted to like ask students in one of their proposals, so they had to call the donors and ask that request, of which it was granted. So there's always a need to actually call back and actually provide your requirements, not just follow what the donor wants. Then to deal with capacity gaps, the major issue there was which is obvious, to provide training to PhD students, master students. And that's not only the only issue, but to actually go into technical and vocational training, because these kind of vocational training are also necessary to actually move this climate agenda forward. But with that in mind, there's also one key important factor to make sure that this training actually make sure that the skills they will get is fit for purpose, because most of this training, that are provided are not actually demanded by the industry or other stakeholders out there. Then also like available knowledge knowledge are available, but they are not turned into action. So there's a need to organize like cross-sharing of information between partners and institutions. So one last point, just to wrap it up. So, there was also an issue of cross-sector collaboration initiatives, whereby you have to bring in all the different sectors, NGOs, universities together, as was the case in Zimbabwe, to actually come up with sorts of the greenhouse gas inventory training, taking into consideration all these different sectors and stakeholders. Then the last point was about the data challenge. So how do we make sure that we actually get the missing data? And in some cases, whereby data is available, but people are not willing to release the data for analysis and making decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anderson. Thanks so much. That's very super interesting. And I also love your technique. I have used it myself. Last point, last point, last point. That's it always buys you a little bit of time, isn't it? So thanks so much, Anderson. That's great feedback. Appreciate it. Let's go to the second group. And when there's like 30 minutes or so, I'll just raise my hand so that you're aware of the time that you have left approximately. Over to you. Is it Lem?
So Asma will present. Khadija will present for us.
Okay. Okay, Khadija, if you could unmute your mic and then turn on your video, that would be great. And we'll give you the 3 minutes.
Khadija, are you there?
It seems like she may not be online. Lillian, well, we could let's jump to group 3 if that's okay, and then we'll come back to group 2 at the end. Hopefully, meanwhile, either Khadija or maybe otherwise yourself could report.
Okay, here is group 3. Yeah, so quickly we had, I think, 3 countries: Botswana, Ethiopia, South Africa, and also a global experience. And some of the key things, good practices we picked are really great, because Botswana shared where they had this good research into knowledge project, which had both local and international universities and governments. I think it ended, but one of the things he shared is that moving away from normal, he talked about broadened communication of the research results, turning them into different products, usable videos, talking to decision makers and presenting results, but also the interactions that happened. So that was good. And I think they used these results into informing some of the adaptation strategies in the country. But this was a regional project. I think even other countries benefited. Then Ethiopia had this good experience where they also talked about how they used local researchers, but with the backup of an international universities from the US to translate their mid and long-term climate strategy, the climate resilience economic strategy, from national level targets to the lower levels. And this is something which I think is also a good experience. And then in South Africa, we had a sharing that South Africa has a good institutional framework for collaboration. So for them, it's so easy that all partners must have right away clear roles and expectations to use whichever partnership they are going into. She didn't go into details because of time, but that is a very good area. And then globally, we also found that there are some continental level knowledge hubs, which are having different thematic working subgroups, where countries would be feeding it in information. But the challenge is, are countries really participating in those hubs? This takes me to some of the challenges that came out. And one of the key challenges is that some of these elements are project-based, donor-driven, and governments are finding them hard to institutionalize these lessons. So at the end of the project, you find that the status remains as it was, or maybe it has worsened. And then two, another challenge that came is a lack of a deliberate knowledge hubs, especially at country level, which can link up maybe with the global and regional hubs, knowledge hubs. And this could be an area where countries can actually contribute their priorities that could shape the research. So that is also a challenge. Then the last one is on coordination. Members looked at so much is out there, so much information, but the absorbing capacity, you can't absorb any information which is not coordinated. Thank you for now. That's what we could capture, but I think my colleagues who are taking notes might have details which we haven't shared yet, but those are broadly what we discussed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Margaret. That's really comprehensive and really appreciated. And I think the last point on coordination that you raised is a super important one as well, that is not always identified at the beginning. So thanks very much. Shall we go to the group 4 with, I believe it is with Ayman, to report back on your discussions, Ayman? 3 minutes over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you, of course, to Renide, Abdelatif, Zainab, Hamza, Ruma, as well as Gloria, who was providing support in that group that discussed in French, but I will be reporting in English some of the key points that arose. It was a group that had both the national level in terms of experience, civil society, private sector, more continental approaches, so very interesting conversations. Some of the comments I would like to share with the broader group are linked to reactions to the conversation so far in terms of how the event has unfolded. Very strong agreement with the content of what was discussed, but also a thirst to move on to the next steps, because there's a feeling that we are all in agreement about many of those important issues, but it's important to drive more action and to be in a more impactful position when it comes to influencing potentially some or contributing to some national level actions. There was so that was quite common. There was also the drive to look at this whole topic of capacity building through a supply chain, because yes, it's important to look at the underground results, but at the same time, you get to the ground through a supply chain of capacity building. We discussed also about a comment that was made by one of the panelists earlier about the difference between capacity building and capacity strengthening. Interestingly, in French, we don't quite have the same, because in French, renforcement des capacités is directly capacity building. So we thought it was an interesting difference between French and English. When it comes to the private sector and in general the role of each of the stakeholders, there was a clear drive to have more clear understanding about the role and responsibilities of each, and to make sure that we are working sustainably and not just ad hoc when it comes to capacity building, to have institutional level capacity building and not individual level capacity building that is not necessarily retained, as important as the individual is, of course, for that. We discussed an exchange around a concrete example that we felt was interesting, that started by an event. Quite often things end with an event, but this particular experience started with an event where that was quite instrumental in establishing and building the trust. So that also harks back to a comment around trust that was made by one of the panelists earlier. So having this trust established, and then putting the stakeholders in an event together, and then after that event, keeping those networks, keeping those contacts, looking at what is happening at the larger scale, and seeing how that could be adapted. Yes, 30 seconds left. I see that. I'll move on quickly to the next points. Then there was a clear sense that it was important to look at the midterm and long-term level. Communication was also identified as important. Some initiatives have been able to still continue despite the current context of challenging displacement and movement, but it's not the case for everyone. Even connecting to events like that are challenging. Sorry for going quickly, I'm very mindful of time. yes, I'll conclude in a fairly traditional way by the fact that the group discussed as well the importance of financing that is even more challenging in these times, and the importance of linking those financing to identified needs and challenges, and that the private sector also is not just a source of funding, but is also asked to look at their business model, rethink them, and look at it from a sustainable perspective. Thank you very much, Daniel. Sorry for rushing.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ayman. You raised so much richness in points, but I particularly think like your group's call to move to action now is really, really important, and it's really close to what we're doing here. So thanks so much, Ayman. And we go directly to you, Marie-Ève.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'll summarize from French to English, so hopefully it's understandable what I'll say. But yeah, we had a very interesting discussion in our group, also raising the fact that as a complement to climate change, maybe we need to also broaden more the accent on environment more broadly, which makes connections maybe and resonate with more stakeholders. There was an interesting example of the involvement of the private sector in Morocco about like helping startup projects getting to maturity, involving a range of stakeholders. It was a bottom-up approach, bringing in local expertise, and where the private sector, academia, and others were really contributing to promote knowledge transfer and enrich knowledge. So I think it's the kind of interesting example at the local or national level that are worth maybe getting inspired from. In terms of gap, we didn't identify the lack of cooperation projects, sometimes across different African countries, trying to do more South-South initiative, and also South-North, more than North-South, but the opposite way. Finding ways to enhance more the knowledge sharing and co-production across different countries and researchers and stakeholders overall. There needs to be an African perspective to solve the African problems, but all should be based on the local experts first. We had also an interesting discussion around time horizon and how like the Africa 2063 as a continental vision should help to align maybe the NAPs and the NDCs to a longer time horizon than what it is currently set to be. Also to strengthen networks, academic or others, for researchers to develop projects and give a wider perspective on knowledge. And a broader reflection we had was that slowly but surely the private sector is realizing the interest related to climate change, and they want to work more with researchers. And there's a question also of going beyond like waiting for funds to build capacities and take action, but to actually start local, identify innovative ideas, and actually from that look for funding, which may actually be more proactive to achieve change. And yes, so I'll stop there for the sake of time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marie-Ève, even with some time left. So thanks so much for all your points. I think, what you point out around the issue of traditional knowledge, local expertise, and also looking at the big picture, the climate change is part of the development challenge. I think these are incredibly valuable points. Let's go back to group 2. I wonder if either Khadija or Lilian are now ready to report back. Thanks very much.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
Daniel.
much.
Yep.
Khadija is not back, but Alejandro will report on us for us.
Thanks. Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks, Alejandro.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll try to keep to time. I get the benefit of being the last reporter, so some of the issues that others have already mentioned, we're also discussing in our group. Maybe just to give the highlights of the discussions, which were very rich and we were introduced to, for example, new concepts that were super interesting. For example, the notion of sportification. I don't know if some of you have heard it, but we got a very good explanation from Margaret, from you and you about this concept that it's it comes from the sport world, but it's about identifying a common challenge that it's almost like something you rally around it, and it becomes almost like a challenge to overcome, as if you were in a competition or in a team sport, for example. So that's an interesting concept applied, obviously, to, in this case, climate change. How this concept could be applied for collaborations or establishing collaborations, because one of the aspects that was raised by colleagues is collaboration often comes in crisis and where it's problems, which is great, of course. Solidarity is, but sometimes it fades away. So how do you maintain those collaborations? How do you strengthen them, and what are the incentives for collaboration? And also something I think was a bit very, very straightforward, very honest, is that when you're talking about partnerships, there are unequal powers in collaboration or networks. So you have to be aware of those power inequalities and see how you can maximize the collaboration. So you turn those inequalities into something that could be harnessed. And something that some of our colleagues said is the importance of mapping the interest of partners when engaging in these collaborations. Of course, we're framing collaborations in the context of capacity building to address climate change in our context. One notion that I think was very interesting is, because we were reflecting on what Chris said about brokering or the knowledge brokering. But it was raised that that's an area of capacity building in itself. How do you broker that knowledge? How do you bring it or translate it to for action? So I found that quite interesting, quite concrete. We also touch upon the issue of the NDCs, highlighting the fact that the NDCs, yes, thank you, Daniel. So highlighting that the NDCs this year have to be updated and revised, and that the NDCs could be that common goal or common challenge, taking into account this notion of sportification, to rally around, in the understanding that particularly now, in the context we're living now in the pandemic, there are even more needs and gaps for capacities, or to adapt the current existing approach to capacity building in the new normal. And also, as other groups have mentioned, the importance of, when talking about stakeholders engagement for action, private sector is fundamental. So I think that's a common thread that we've seen also throughout the work, the groups. So I'll stop here, unless Lillian, you want to add something, if I missed something.
I'll take that. I'll jump in quickly and take that for a no. You covered everything wonderfully well. So to move on to the closing remarks and next steps. But I think, yeah, Alejandro, what you point out about the shape and essence of collaborations and looking at the mid and long term of these unions is so important. Move away from the project idea that puts us in such a challenge. When we try to do to change sustainably and in a sustainable way, meaning into the future. Thank you, everyone, for your work in the groups and for your reporting back, for your rich discussions. This is wonderful and hugely appreciated by everyone. Let's move on then to the final session of closing remarks and next steps, where Emmanuel Cheo has really the tough task to bring it all together, right? So Emmanuel, that'll be over to you, but let me just briefly introduce you so people are clear who you are. Emmanuel is an associate academic officer at the UN University's Institute for Environment and Human Security. He's based in Germany. Emmanuel undertakes research in a number of areas, including environmental vulnerability and ecosystem services, and has a lot of practical experience in capacity building, including the promotion of entrepreneurship skills in youth or in young people. So Emmanuel has a huge appreciation and love for animals and meeting people and staying in touch. So he's now going to be in touch with us and giving us his perspective of the day. After Emmanuel, we'll go to Alejandro to also tell us a little bit more about what comes after this. Over to you, Emmanuel. If you could keep it to 5 minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. I think I would like to share my screen since I prepare a short presentation.
Okay, we can see it now. Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much again once more. And maybe I should also use this opportunity to thank our participants and also to greet them. It has been an amazing event, but I think also being part of this, as UNU being part of this this knowledge to action series of events has been an amazing experience, not only because of the very fruitful and rich input from the respective partner, but also the collaboration between the respective partner, which we were competent and very respectful. And so, because of time, I would not like to give a kind of conclusive remark of the event today, but rather to focus on or to emphasize on some of the points that was already mentioned by Renida at the beginning of our opening remark, like the key outcome of this series of events that started in Latin America, in Asia, and now in Africa. So, and also to propose some kind of option, what we think could be possible next steps on how to drive this momentum that has been created by this event, as well as how can we keep this partnership together in translating this key outcome into reality on the ground. So this is a kind of overview of what I prepared, which mainly focus on the key outcome, next step, and a little bit of information about UNU, EHS, why it's important, or what the interest of driving this process, or some of the options that I will be presenting. So as already mentioned by Renida in her opening remark, preparing and implementing NDCs and NAP, it is very important for the process to be inclusive in terms of producing and having access to data and information. Another important outcome also is that university can build and retain long-lasting capacity, which makes it to be sustainable both at the national and the regional level. Strong institutions and governance component are very important in implementing NAPs and NDCs. Also engaging the private sector is key because there are relevant information from private sector that can help to inform these processes. Advocacy and communication is something that has been repeated on several from these different groups. Communication is key in accelerating implementation in NAP and in the NDCs. Also access to finance, because without funding, none of the above mentioned points will not be implemented. And finally, networking and partnership is key, which is one of the major objectives of the PCCB organizing this platform, creating a platform for different organizations to meet, share, exchange ideas, and come up with options on how to translate this into reality on the ground. So the next question is, what are the next steps? What are the possible next steps on translating what has been achieved from this different series of events into reality on the ground? And how can we keep our partnership, or how can we create a platform where new partners can join? As UNU, we came up with the idea where we wanted to create a community of practice. This is an online platform which we see it to have two formats. We have this online platform and also a physical meeting, maybe during COP or during the climate week, to invite participants or partners to meet and discuss, maybe update, to kind of gather update from their respective countries or organizations. So the key objective of this platform will be to organize capacity building, but with specialized topic, not the traditional university topics, but more or less topics that are not usually so common at university. For example, we talk about negotiation skills, how to conduct greenhouse gas inventory, or methods on facilitating transparency in terms of reporting. So these are the kind of capacity building topics that we will be dealing with on such a platform. We also aim at promoting dialogue, sensitization campaign between students, like empowering students to come up with clubs like Students Club championing climate action, and also developing their skills. And within this context, we identify champions, youth champions, and we invite them in such gathering that we'll be organizing, maybe during the COP or during the Climate Week. So it's a platform under development, which a lot of input has come from UNU. But what we wanted to do as next step for this platform is to invite different partners, especially those who have been involved in this series of knowledge to action events, to join us and to further develop the concept note so that it's more or less belong to us rather than only on UNU. So the next step will be to have a meeting, inviting partners to discuss on how can we further develop this platform. Also to add that this platform is linked to other initiatives that we are currently working on. These are all these initiatives are under development. Like, for example, we submitted a project proposal with the ICI, which is the International Climate Initiative, hosted by the Federal Ministry of Environment in Germany, which is on South-South collaboration to strengthen institutional and technical capacity to improve consistency and quality in reporting within the context of Paris Agreement. And in this context, we aim to look at 4 countries, South-South from Bhutan, Nepal, Gambia, and Mali. And the similarity of most of these countries is that they have not submitted any the biennial update report or the national communication report. So that is a kind of key focus of this project, to support them to be able to make this report as well as to update the NDC. So most of the initiatives that we have here are very objective oriented, with key outcome and setting institutions in place. We also have another initiative that is currently under development is the Africa Youth ACE Hub in Ghana.
Pardon, Emmanuel, dear friend. I'm sorry to ask you to rush it a little bit if possible, just because we're in extra time. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, then it's fine. Then I will just present this initiative, which is in line also with what Shanesh presented. So these are some of the initiatives that are currently under development. And finally, a little bit about UNU. UNU is the academic arm of United Nations. It bridges bridges the gap between international academic communities and the UN nation. And it is, we have 17 of them around in 12 countries around the world. And it is viewed as a think tank of UN. We conduct research. We also organize specialized education and capacity building. So this is a map of where the different locations of UN institutes. And finally, thank you for your time. And I hope I hope managed to convince you, and you definitely hear from us, or you can as well contact me. This is my information. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emmanuel. You have definitely convinced me, so you'll be hearing from me, at least. Alejandro Kilpatrick, team lead for the capacity building subdivision of the UNFCCC. The word is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. I'll be very brief because we're in overtime. So first, to thank all the partners, to thank you personally, Daniel, for excellent moderation, and also to thank all the partners that made possible this third Capacity Building Knowledge to Action Day for the African region. SEI, ISD, NAP Global Network, NDC Partnership, Mohammed VI Foundation, POW, IDRC. So thank you very much to all the partners. And in terms of the next steps, this will not remain only as events being held and being ticked like in the box. So we have now concluded this round of events for the 3 major regions, and we will be preparing a synthesis report in the form of a policy paper that could also be of use to several stakeholders, including, for example, government officials and other stakeholders. These events have been circumscribed under the the work of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. And the Paris Committee on Capacity Building has established a network of collaborators, of which several of the co-organizers of this event are already members. So I think that's a space for continuity. I mean, this event was supposed to take place in the context of regional climate weeks. So we're aiming to, we don't know what's the situation with climate weeks next year, but we're aiming to continue developing with or working with partners for a series of events maybe next year, starting to the end of the year, where we would like to engage some of the participants in this Capacity Building Knowledge to Action Day. Also, maybe just to highlight, some concrete actions have also already started as outcomes of these days. For example, with the IDRC, we're working on mapping exercises on how to engage the private sector, how to assess their capacity needs and gaps, and how they can be engaging more actively in climate action, something that came across in the previous Capacity Building Knowledge to Action Days and also in this session. So that's a concrete action. So I'm very optimistic that beyond the excellent discussions we had here, that the connections are being established. Curiosity has been created for people to start engaging with each other. I mean, what Emmanuel presented is a good example also where we could add value. So having said that, thank you very, very much. And you will be hearing more from us. This is not this does not conclude here. This is a step for continued building forward. And again, thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to our interpreters, and thank you to our breakout groups facilitators, note takers, and again to you, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alejandro, and I extend my thanks to everyone as you just did. Great team, great participation. I just wanted to leave you with a couple of ideas that I've collected this morning and afternoon, just as a way to try to bring it to a close. But I think one of the things that resonates more is that we need to create genuinely flat collaborations moving forward. And flat is a word that may sound incredibly, boring actually, because what is flat? So instead of flat, we could call it rich collaborations, diverse, passionate, alive. That's I think where we have to take things that have to be, very open, very, very human in a sense. And I think, the way that those partnerships are formed, how we, each one of us, contributes to the formation of that matters a lot, because in doing so, we are creating a space or not creating a space where a partnership that is honestly based in values, in the values that we have been discussing today, is enabled or is not enabled. And there's a responsibility on this for everyone, for donors, for private sector, for activists, for academia. Everybody really needs to kind of perhaps change a little bit or reconsider their philosophies for collaboration in order to make this happen. So change has to come from everywhere. I think, we also have seen that capacity building, capacity strengthening, the ways of undertaking research, the whole knowledge process and how that is managed from generation to communication and so on, it requires a certain set of values and skills. And particularly, I want to focus on the values that are not always there. What we were basically referring to, the need to create this really open, diverse, representative space. And maybe I believe that that's one of the reasons why we often see limited impact, not only in policy, but also in action. So I do think like generating these richer partnerships would also work to the favor of how we would then see this work impacting policy, practice, action. Yeah. So I think that's the journey that we really are on. We are on it, and as Alejandro said, we are part of it. This is only a moment of that journey, and that's what we are trying to do with the capacity or with the knowledge to action days, really making that connection. So it's a continuing journey. Hopefully, when as Alejandro said, there will be next concrete steps, and as you're part of this network, you'll surely be informed. But for now, thanks so much for your time. Thanks for going the extra time, the extra mile. I think that shows already something very positive in terms of what we're talking about. And from our side, goodbye for now. Stay in touch, stay collaborating, stay positive, and until the next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, Walter.
Ciao, ciao.
Au revoir. Au revoir tout le monde.
Au revoir. Au revoir, Isane.
Okay, everyone, we close the meeting right now if everything's fine. See you next time. Thank you so much.
Gracias, César.
Gracias, Alejandro. Mucho gusto, sí, conocerte.
Igualmente. Chao.
Hasta luego, chao.